The vehicle everyone knows, but almost no one understands. There are machines from World War II that only historians remember. And then there's the Jeep. Small, boxy, unarmored, unimpressive at first glance. But no other vehicle from the war became as recognizable or as universally respected as this one. It wasn't a tank. It wasn't fast. It didn't carry heavy weapons. Yet it became the workhorse of an army on the move. Soldiers trusted it the way infantry in earlier wars trusted horses, as something dependable, simple, and impossible to replace. It carried ammunition to front lines. It hauled wounded men to safety. It towed cannons through mud and snow. It transported officers, scouts, radio teams, engineers, chaplains, and generals. If a road didn't exist, the Jeep made one. If the terrain was broken, rocky, flooded, or frozen, the Jeep climbed it, pushed through it, or bounced across it. And wherever American forces appeared, from the sands of North Africa to the hedgerows of France, from Italian mountains to Pacific jungles, the Jeep appeared with them. German soldiers had a word for it: Der kleine amerikanische Wagen, the little American vehicle. But even they quickly understood something. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was mobility. It was logistics. It was momentum. It allowed commanders to move faster than retreating enemies. It gave infantry the ability to reposition before a counterattack. It allowed medics to save lives that would have been lost waiting for stretchers. Photographs of the war became filled with one shape: flat hood, vertical grille, open cab, spare tire on the rear, a star on the side, a Jeep. It became as iconic as the M1 helmet, the B-17 bomber, or the Sherman tank. A symbol of an army that moved not on rails or slow armored columns, but with speed and flexibility. And yet, for all its recognition, one question remains: why is it called Jeep? The name feels natural today. But in 1940–1941, when the vehicle was still experimental, no manual used the word. No engineer wrote it. No officer approved it. The name didn't come from the Pentagon, the factories, or the manuals. It came from somewhere else, somewhere less official and much more human. Before the name existed, there was a requirement, a challenge, issued by the U.S. Army. And that challenge would start a race between companies that didn't know they were building a legend. A war looking for wheels. Before the Jeep existed, the U.S. Army faced a growing problem. War was spreading across Europe and Asia. Poland had fallen. France collapsed in weeks. German armored divisions moved with terrifying speed, coordinated by radios, supported by aircraft, supplied by highly mobile logistics. The U.S. Army watched all of it and realized something uncomfortable. It wasn't ready. American infantry still relied on motorcycles with sidecars, horses, and outdated trucks that struggled off-road. Officers moved slowly. Scouts lacked reliable transport. Engineers could not relocate equipment fast enough. A modern war required mobility, fast mobility, reliable mobility. So in July 1940, the Army issued a request, not a suggestion, to American manufacturers. Build a small, lightweight, four-wheel drive reconnaissance vehicle, capable of carrying men and equipment, able to go anywhere through any terrain, strong enough for war, light enough to lift, load, or push if needed. It had to weigh less than 1,300 pounds, fit specific dimensions, use standardized parts for mass production, and, most demanding of all, be delivered as a functioning prototype in just 49 days. Not 49 days to plan, 49 days to design it, engineer it, build it, and drive it. Almost no company wanted the contract. It was too fast, too risky, too expensive. Two major manufacturers declined immediately. Only one small company stepped forward, a company that, on paper, had no business attempting it. The American Bantam Car Company, a tiny firm from Butler, Pennsylvania, underfunded, struggling, facing bankruptcy. But Bantam had something the larger companies didn't: desperation, talent, and a chief engineer who believed impossible deadlines were challenges, not walls. His name was Karl Probst. He wasn't hired at first. Bantam couldn't afford him. So he made a proposal of his own. He would work for free until the Army approved the design. Probst sat down with a pencil and drafting paper. Day after day, hour after hour, he worked. No teams, no committees, no endless meetings. Just design, calculation, correction, and willpower. In 5 days, Probst finished the full blueprint. In 7, he provided complete cost estimates. And in 49 days from the Army request, Bantam rolled out a prototype vehicle. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The Army finally had something it desperately needed: a machine that could move soldiers as fast as modern war demanded. And before the first engine cooled, the race to build the Jeep had begun. But Bantam wasn't alone for long. 2 much larger companies would soon enter the fight, and the struggle for the future Jeep was about to turn political. The race becomes a war of its own. The Bantam prototype worked, and it impressed the Army. It wasn't elegant, and it wasn't flawless, but it did something no other American vehicle at the time could do. It went anywhere. It climbed hills, powered through mud, crossed trenches, handled rough terrain without hesitation. Test officers took turns behind the wheel and came back saying the same thing: this will work. But admiration didn't guarantee victory, because while Bantam built the first functional prototype, it also exposed its biggest weakness: production capacity. Bantam was too small, too underfunded, and had too few factories to scale the design into tens of thousands of vehicles. The Army needed a supplier who could mass produce under wartime pressure. So even before Bantam's prototype had finished field trials, the Army sent the blueprints, Probst's blueprints, to 2 much larger companies: Willys Overland, Ford Motor Company. For Bantam, it was a betrayal. For the Army, it was necessity. The United States was preparing for a global war, not a boutique contract. Both Willys and Ford began modifying the design, using Bantam's layout as the baseline. Each company produced its own prototype: Bantam BRC, Willys Quad, Ford Pygmy. All 3 met Army requirements. All 3 worked, but one stood out. Not for comfort, not for refinement, but for something far more important in war: power. The Willys design used a stronger engine, the Willys Go Devil, a rugged, simple, reliable 60-horsepower motor that gave the vehicle capability no competitor matched. Test drivers called it fast for its size. Mechanics said easy to repair. Commanders noted low learning curve, high usefulness. By late 1941, with the world accelerating toward full war, the Army made its decision. Willys would become the primary manufacturer. Ford would build under license, ensuring production numbers could scale rapidly. And Bantam? The company that built the first prototype, the one that proved the concept was possible, was reduced to manufacturing trailers and parts. It was a harsh outcome, but war rarely rewards pioneers. It rewards the machines and companies that can deliver quantity fast enough to matter. With the design chosen, the vehicle entered mass production. And with it came a new problem. What do you call it? Because officially, the name still didn't exist. Letters, numbers, and a name that didn't exist yet. By the time Willys and Ford ramped up production, the vehicle was no longer a prototype. It was a standardized machine ready for mass manufacturing at wartime speed. But it still didn't have a proper name. On Army paperwork, it wasn't Jeep. It wasn't even close. It was identified only through military designation codes depending on model, function and manufacturer. Willys MB, Ford GPW. Earlier prototypes, Bantam BRC, Willys Quad, Ford Pygmy. These letters weren't random. They meant something. G, government. P, 80-inch wheelbase reconnaissance vehicle. W, Willys designed. So when soldiers or mechanics spoke about it officially, they didn't say a nickname. They said, "Bring up the GP," or "We need another MB on the line." Functional, precise, sterile. But soldiers don't speak like instruction manuals. And war has always turned technology into language, simple, fast, memorable. Just as Messerschmitt became 109, submachine gun became Tommy gun, and cigarette lighter became Zippo. This little vehicle needed a name that ordinary troops could shout under fire and still be understood. That name didn't come from engineers, or generals, or factory executives. It came from the troops themselves. They were the ones driving it through mud, snow, deserts, and craters. They were the ones repairing it under fire. They were the ones who watched it survive jumps, impacts, overloading, and abuse that would have destroyed any civilian vehicle. And among those troops, a word began to surface, quietly at first. A word spoken in motor pools, training camps, and test grounds. A name that didn't sound official. A name that sounded earned. Jeep. No documents explain exactly when the first soldier said it. No officer recorded the moment the nickname appeared. But by late 1941, one fact was clear. The name was spreading. Mechanics said it casually. Drivers said it proudly. Officers began using it in conversation. And soon, something remarkable happened. The nickname was used so widely, so naturally, that people started assuming it was the official name. But it wasn't. Not yet. The Jeep still needed one moment, a spark, to move from slang to identity. That moment would come not on a battlefield, but in front of reporters, cameras, and generals. And one photograph would permanently lock the word Jeep into history. The press conference that named the Jeep. By early 1941, the nickname Jeep was spreading rapidly among soldiers and mechanics, but it wasn't official. It wasn't written in manuals. It wasn't in any procurement contracts. It was still a barracks word, military slang. And like all slang, it needed one catalyst, one public moment to become permanent. That moment came in Washington, D.C., February 20, 1941. The Army staged a demonstration of its new light reconnaissance vehicle for journalists, dignitaries, and political leaders. War was spreading worldwide, and America needed to show that it was preparing, technologically, militarily, symbolically. To make an impression, the Army chose one of its best drivers. Irving Red Hausman, a seasoned test driver known for handling the vehicle with skill and confidence. Reporters gathered, cameras clicked, engines started. Hausman drove the small vehicle over obstacles, upstairs, across uneven ground, and through maneuvers meant to highlight what made it revolutionary. It worked. The little machine impressed everyone. Toward the end of the demonstration, a journalist asked Hausman, "What do you call this thing?" Hausman, without ceremony, answered the way soldiers had been answering for months. "It's a Jeep." A simple word, casual, unintended as an official label. But the reporters heard it and wrote it down. The next morning, newspapers across the country published the photograph. A small, rugged vehicle climbing the steps of the U.S. Capitol. And underneath it, for the first time in print, the Army's new Jeep. That was it. That single caption did what no committee, general, or engineer had done. It made the word official. Once the public embraced it, the Army couldn't undo it. Once industry embraced it, branding became inevitable. Once soldiers embraced it, the name became part of military language. And from that moment on, it didn't matter what the manual said. It wasn't the Willys MB. It wasn't the Ford GPW. It wasn't the GP. It was the Jeep. And every vehicle built afterward carried not just a designation, but an identity. Now the name was set. The only question left was, could this little machine survive the real test, the battlefield? Baptism by fire. A nickname and a newspaper headline could make the Jeep famous. But only war could make it indispensable. The first large deployments of Jeeps arrived with American forces in North Africa late 1942. Operation Torch was the vehicle's true proving ground, a harsh, unforgiving environment of sand, heat, dust, broken terrain, and logistical chaos. Perfect conditions to expose weaknesses. Instead, the Jeep revealed strengths. 1. Mobility the Army never had before. Infantry commanders immediately understood what they'd been given. A vehicle that could maneuver faster than marching troops, lighter than trucks, more reliable than motorcycles, able to cross ground that stopped heavier vehicles cold. The Jeep didn't just move soldiers, it moved war. 2. Scouts finally had a tool. Before the Jeep, reconnaissance troops relied on foot patrols or motorcycles, vulnerable and limited. Now they had low-profile mobility, 4x4 traction, space for radios, room for extra fuel, a mount for a machine gun if needed. Suddenly, American reconnaissance became fast, flexible, and dangerous to underestimate. 3. Medical evacuation. One of the Jeep's most unexpected roles became one of its most vital: ambulance. 2 stretchers could be mounted on brackets at the rear. Medics could pull wounded soldiers from the battlefield faster than ever before. Countless lives were saved because the Jeep could get places no ambulance could reach. 4. Artillery's best friend. The Jeep could tow 37mm anti-tank guns, 57mm guns, mortars, ammo trailers, fast relocations. Fast firepower meant fast firepower, a huge tactical advantage. 5. A machine soldiers modified without limit. In North Africa, and later in Sicily, Italy, France, and the Pacific, soldiers customized their Jeeps for every mission imaginable. Wire cutters on the bumper, radios for forward observers, stretchers, machine gun mounts, extra fuel cans, camouflage nets, sand channels, and tools. The Jeep became whatever war needed it to be. German officers noticed. Captured documents from 1943 to 1944 include multiple reports describing the American vehicle. The small American car is everywhere. Its mobility is surprising. Enemy patrols appear quickly and disappear just as fast. In a war dominated by tanks, bombers, and artillery, the Jeep earned respect not through firepower, but through reliability, versatility, and presence. Wherever American flags landed on foreign soil, Jeeps landed with them. And wherever Jeeps went, momentum followed. But the Jeep's reputation didn't peak in North Africa. It would become legendary in Europe and feared in the Pacific as a machine that simply refused to break. The Jeep that wouldn't quit. By 1943-1944, the Jeep had moved far beyond useful. It was becoming something soldiers rarely used to describe equipment: trusted. And that trust was earned the hard way, not through specifications, but through survival. Europe, mud, snow, and the impossible terrain. When American forces pushed into Italy and then France, the Jeep encountered conditions far worse than North Africa. Deep, clinging mud, narrow mountain passes, flooded fields, destroyed roads, forests turned to chaos by shale fire, winter snow that swallowed boots and wheels alike. Trucks bogged down, half-tracks slipped, motorcycles were useless. But the Jeep? Mechanics joked, if the engine starts, it goes. Infantry found that if they couldn't walk through an area, the Jeep often still could. And if it couldn't, 4 men could lift it. No other military vehicle in WWII had this combination: 4x4 traction, extremely low weight, short wheelbase, simple mechanics anyone could repair. It was the only vehicle that could keep pace with fast-moving infantry in broken terrain. In the Pacific, jungle proving grounds. The Pacific presented different challenges: vines and dense vegetation, corrosive salt air, mud that swallowed boots whole, steep volcanic slopes, constant rainfall. The Jeep adapted. Amphibious kits, stretcher carriers, flamethrower mounts, makeshift armored panels, radio communication platforms. Marines used them for everything from beach landings to wounded extraction. Japanese soldiers wrote in intelligence reports, "The American small car moves quickly and silently. It appears suddenly." The reputation, nearly unbreakable. This wasn't exaggeration. In field reports, soldiers documented Jeeps running with bullet holes, dragging one broken wheel, driving after losing oil pressure, operating in temperatures far below design limits, starting after being submerged in water, surviving improvised repairs with wire, rope, or nothing at all. It wasn't indestructible, nothing in war is, but it could take astonishing punishment. A common expression spread across units: if you can't fix it with wire, you don't understand the Jeep. The result: ubiquity. By 1944, the Jeep wasn't just a vehicle. It was the face of American mobility. Wherever U.S. troops went, so did Jeeps. D-Day beaches, hedgerow battles, the Hurtgen Forest, the Bulge, island hopping in the Pacific, mountain warfare in Italy. It was the machine that made the U.S. Army feel fast. And that speed, that presence, reshaped modern warfare. The Jeep didn't just impress soldiers. It shocked American industry and became a symbol of manufacturing power. And when the war ended, the Jeep story was only halfway done. The machine that shocked industry and commanders alike. By 1944, the Jeep wasn't just a battlefield success, it was a logistical miracle. Not sleek, not elegant, not glamorous. But in a war defined by movement, the Jeep became the backbone of Allied mobility. American industry learns what it can do. Before the war, few believed the U.S. industrial base could retool for conflict fast enough. The Jeep proved otherwise. Willys and Ford together produced over 600,000 Jeeps in just 4 years. That meant one Jeep every few minutes, countless spare parts, standardized components, interchangeable repairs between brands. A soldier in Italy could replace a Ford part with a Willys part. A mechanic in the Pacific could repair both with the same tools. Interchangeability was not a convenience, it was a strategic advantage. This standardization stunned foreign military observers. German officers wrote, "The Americans produce not for perfection, but for quantity and reliability. Their small vehicles seem infinite." They weren't wrong. Commanders realize they can fight differently. The Jeep allowed commanders to move reconnaissance rapidly, shift officers between formations, coordinate artillery in real time, deliver ammunition directly to frontline units, evacuate wounded faster than ever, maintain communication between scattered elements. War became faster. Information moved quicker. Units could regroup, flank, and reinforce with unprecedented flexibility. This wasn't a tactical improvement. It was a strategic change. The Jeep didn't win battles alone, but it enabled victories that required coordination, speed, and precision. It made armies agile. The Allies gained a mobility edge. The German equivalent, the Kübelwagen, was well-designed, reliable, and efficient. But it lacked four-wheel drive, the Jeep's climbing capability, its ruggedness under heavy loads, its ability to traverse deep mud and jungle terrain. The Soviets loved the Jeep so much that American Lend-Lease shipments included over 50,000 units, which were used by reconnaissance units, by officers, by artillery spotters, by infantry companies at every front from Stalingrad to Berlin. A Soviet officer famously stated, "The Jeep is America's best weapon after the aircraft." The identity takes hold. By the end of 1944, the vehicle had become a symbol in training manuals, a trademark in logistics, a cultural icon in photos sent home, a presence in every major American operation. It was impossible to imagine U.S. forces without it. And every time a soldier climbed into one, the name, simple, informal, unofficial, echoed through the motor pool. Bring the Jeep. The war would end, but the Jeep's journey wouldn't. Its next challenge wasn't battle, but the transformation from military tool to global icon. The Jeep after victory. Everywhere the war went, it stayed. When World War II ended in 1945, countless military machines were abandoned, buried, or melted down for scrap. Tanks were too expensive to maintain. Trucks consumed too much fuel. Aircraft required skilled crews and costly upkeep. But the Jeep? Armies didn't discard it. They kept it. Because unlike most wartime equipment, the Jeep wasn't a weapon born for destruction. It was a tool born for movement. Europe rebuilds on Jeep wheels. In the ruins of Western Europe, U.S. forces loaned or sold thousands of Jeeps to devastated nations. France used them to rebuild roads and transport officials. Belgium and the Netherlands put them into civilian service. Norway and Denmark used them to patrol remote borders. Newly liberated governments used them as their first official vehicles. It was the perfect machine for a continent where fuel was scarce, roads were broken, infrastructure was shattered, trained mechanics were few. The Jeep required almost nothing except fuel, basic tools, and someone who knew how an engine worked. Soviet Union from Lend-Lease to adoption. During the war, the USSR received more than 50,000 Jeeps through Lend-Lease. After the war, the Red Army reverse-engineered the design and produced its own derivative vehicles, including Gas-67, Gas-69. The Soviet military absorbed the Jeep concept deeply because the terrain of Eastern Europe demanded small, rugged, simple machines. Asia, a new role in a divided world. After Japan's surrender, American occupation forces used Jeeps for policing, supply transport, liaison duty, reconstruction, diplomatic movement. When civil wars and regional conflicts erupted across Asia, China, Korea, and Indochina, Jeeps were there, serving whichever forces had access to American supply lines. The Jeep becomes a standard. Western militaries already trusted it. Eastern Bloc militaries copied it. Developing countries adopted it. Civilian administrations relied on it. The Jeep became not just a military vehicle, but a platform for radios, stretchers, recoilless rifles, couriers, scouting parties, border patrols, early peacekeeping missions. It did everything because it could go everywhere. One more war, Korea. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, the U.S. military once again depended on the Jeep. The terrain was brutal. Steep hills, deep snow, muddy valleys, narrow mountain trails. But reports from the front were familiar. The Jeep continues to be our most reliable transport. It reaches positions no truck can reach. Indispensable for moving wounded. This was no longer a WWII phenomenon. This was designed brilliance proving itself again under new conditions. But survival wasn't enough. After Korea, the Jeep would face a new challenge, transforming from a wartime necessity into a global civilian icon. From battlefield workhorse to civilian icon. When the guns finally went silent and nations began rebuilding, one question rose across the industry. What should become of the Jeep now that war was over? Most wartime machines had no civilian purpose. Sherman tanks wouldn't plow fields, B-17s wouldn't deliver groceries, half-tracks wouldn't run postal routes. But the Jeep? People saw it differently. Farmers wanted it. Returning American soldiers knew exactly what the Jeep could do: pull loads, operate in mud, cross uneven fields, haul equipment, start every morning with minimal maintenance. For American agriculture, especially in rural areas with poor infrastructure, the Jeep was a gift. Willys Overland recognized this immediately. Willys moves fast, the civilian Jeep. In 1945, Willys launched the CJ2A, the first mass-produced civilian Jeep. It kept the flat fenders, the iconic grille, the short wheelbase, the Go Devil engine, the rugged 4x4 drivetrain. But it added a tailgate, a spare tire on the side, a slightly revised interior, PTO, power takeoff attachments for farm equipment. Willys marketed it not as a military surplus vehicle, but as a tool for daily life. Advertisements called it the all-around farm workhorse, the powerhouse on wheels. For many families, especially in rural America, it was the first machine that made outdoor labor manageable. Police, firefighters, surveyors, explorers. The Jeep slipped seamlessly into post-war society. Police departments adopted it for rough terrain. Forest services used it for patrol and firefighting. Surveyors loved its ability to reach remote sites. Adventurers used it to travel where cars couldn't go. It was not a luxury vehicle. It was a freedom vehicle, a symbol in popular culture. By the early 1950s, Americans didn't see the Jeep as a leftover military truck. They saw it as a camping machine, a hunting companion, a mountain explorer, a light industrial tool, an off-road toy before such a term existed. Movies, magazines, and travel posters featured Jeeps climbing cliffs, crossing streams, or pulling loads double their weight. The world noticed. Countries that had used Jeeps during the war wanted civilian versions for farms, postal routes, police, rural doctors, government agencies. The Jeep became one of the first truly global civilian 4x4 vehicles. The name sticks permanently. By the time the Jeep logo appeared on civilian models, the name had long outgrown its slang origins. It was now a registered trademark, a brand, an identity. And nobody doubted where it came from. A word spoken casually by soldiers, repeated to a journalist, printed in a newspaper, and carried around the world. But the Jeep's influence didn't stop with peace. It shaped future militaries, inspired entire vehicle classes, and became a blueprint for mobility in the modern world. A blueprint for modern military mobility. By the mid-1950s, it was clear that the Jeep wasn't just a successful military vehicle, it was the template for everything that came after it. Nations studying World War II noticed a pattern. The armies that moved fastest weren't always the ones with the biggest tanks. They were the ones with reliable light vehicles that could reach any corner of the battlefield. And the Jeep had defined that category. NATO and the Western allies follow the formula. After WWII, almost every NATO member either adopted the Jeep or built a direct derivative. Canada, M38 variants. Britain, Austin Champ, inspired by Jeep dimensions. France, Hotchkiss M201, licensed Jeep production. Norway and Denmark, post-war Willys imports. Even when armies replaced Jeeps with newer light 4x4s, those designs almost always followed the same principles. Light, low silhouette, simple to repair, short wheelbase, maximum off-road traction. The Jeep had proven the formula. Other countries simply copied it. The Soviet response. The USSR had received tens of thousands of Jeeps through Lend-Lease. They studied them, measured them, drove them through mud, snow, and forest. And then they built vehicles based on the same concept. GAZ-67, wartime derivative. GAZ-69, post-war light 4x4 standard. Both became staples of Warsaw Pact mobility. The Jeep had influenced both sides of the emerging Cold War. Korea, the Jeep's second war. In Korea, 1950-1953, the Jeep once again proved its value. The terrain was brutal. Steep mountains, deep winter snow, narrow, rocky trails. Reports from the front were consistent. The Jeep goes where nothing else will. It remains our most flexible vehicle. Ambushes, artillery observation, casualty evacuation, the Jeep was everywhere, just as it had been in WWII. Military doctrine changes because of it. Before the Jeep, armies assumed mobility required heavy trucks, armored cars, horses. After the Jeep, military planners accepted a new truth. Small, light, fast vehicles win wars of movement. This philosophy influenced U.S. M151 Mutt, British Land Rover Series 1, Soviet UAZ 469, France P4, Japanese Toyota Land Cruiser originally developed with Jeep input. The Jeep didn't just create a class of vehicles, it created an entire military doctrine around rapid deployment and flexible logistics. A reputation that spread without propaganda. Some machines need marketing. The Jeep needed only performance. Every soldier who sat in one carried its reputation forward. Americans brought stories home. Allies recommended it to their governments. Developing nations requested it for their armies. Media captured it on film and photographs. By the mid-20th century, the word Jeep meant far more than a brand. It meant mobility, simplicity, reliability, freedom of movement. A machine that made modern warfare and post-war reconstruction possible. The Jeep wasn't designed to become a legend, but sometimes legends are built accidentally, by soldiers, by necessity, and by a single word that refuses to die. The legacy of a name that outlived the war. When World War II ended, millions of people wanted to forget the machines that defined it. Tanks, bombers, artillery pieces, instruments of destruction belonged to the past. But the Jeep was different. It didn't symbolize devastation. It symbolized movement, reaching safety, delivering supplies, pulling wounded men out of fire, crossing terrain no one else could cross. It represented something rare in war, a machine that saved more lives than it ended. From slang to global word. No committee invented the name Jeep. It wasn't a branding choice. It wasn't marketing. It wasn't strategy. It was a mechanic's joke, a soldier's shorthand, a journalist's curiosity, a headline writer's instinct. And once the word appeared in newspapers, it spread faster than the army could control. By the time peace came, Jeep was spoken in dozens of languages, written into procurement documents, recognized by civilians who had never seen a battlefield, synonymous with rugged simplicity. It became one of the rare names, like Zipper or Kleenex, that blurred into a universal concept, not just a product. Jeep as a cultural symbol. Veterans kept their memories of the Jeep alive, in stories told to children, in photos kept in boxes, in reunions, museums, and air shows, in restored vehicles brought back to life by enthusiasts. Hollywood embraced it. Documentaries featured it. Authors wrote about it. Collectors hunted for original models. The Jeep became a symbol of American ingenuity, Allied cooperation, industrial power, the everyday soldier's endurance. A vehicle that still lives. Modern Jeeps, from CJ to Wrangler, trace their lineage directly to the WW2 Willys MB. The flat fenders evolved. The grille changed but stayed recognizable.
The proportions remained compact, purposeful, honest. Even today, 80 years later, the silhouette carries the DNA of the wartime original. And around the world, restored military Jeeps still drive. In parades, in reenactments, on farms, in forests, in deserts, in the hands of collectors preserving history. The war has ended. Generations have changed. But the Jeep, the little machine rushed into existence under impossible deadlines, refuses to fade. What the name truly means. The origin of the word Jeep doesn't come from mythology or marketing genius. It comes from soldiers trying to describe a machine that didn't fit any category. Too small to be a truck, too strong to be a car, too versatile to name simply. So they gave it a sound, a short, punchy syllable that matched its character. Jeep. A name that meant tough, loyal, adaptable, uncomplaining, ready for anything. A name born from war, adopted by peace, and carried across generations. The final truth. The Jeep wasn't designed to become a legend. It became a legend because soldiers trusted it, enemies respected it, industry scaled it, and the world needed it. And the name? The world didn't choose it. The war did. End.